Hello and welcome to another episode of the Men for Life podcast. I am Sean Corcoran, the CEO of Men for Life. We are a national nonprofit organization with the goal to empower men to become more informed and more active participants in the pro-life movement. Today, my guest is Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. How are you doing today, Dr. Morse?
I'm doing great, Sean.
Man, I'm very excited to have you. Thank you so much for coming. And Dr. Morse is the founder of the Ruth Institute, an interfaith international coalition to defend the family and build a civilization of love. Dr. Morse was campaign spokeswoman for California's winning Proposition 8 campaign, defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman. She has authored or co-authored 6 books and spoken around the globe. Her work has been translated into Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Polish, Chuukese, which is the native language of the Micronesian islands. Her latest book, The Sexual State, How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church Was Right All Along. Dr. Morse earned her Ph.D. at the University of Rochester and taught economics at both Yale and George Mason University for 15 years. Dr. Morse was named one of the Catholic Stars of 2013 on a list that included Pope Francis and Pope Benedict XVI. That same year, the Southern Poverty Law Center added the Ruth Institute to their hate map as an anti-LGBT hate group. Dr. Morse and her husband are parents of an adopted child, a birth child, a goddaughter, and were foster parents for San Diego County to 8 foster children. In 2015, Dr. Morse and her husband relocated to Lake Charles, Louisiana, where the work of the Ruth Institute continues. Dr. Morse, that is a much more impressive biography than what I have. At least as it pertains to the work you're currently doing.
Well, thank you. You have a pretty impressive fatherhood biography yourself there, actually, which is an important qualification for this line of work that you and I are in. And I want to say that Sean Corcoran is one of the first people I met when I moved to Lake Charles, Louisiana, because somebody told me about your work in family law. And we collaborated on a program for people who'd been through divorce and, just a number of ways that you and I connected over the years here at Lake Charles.
Yeah, and to be honest, I had no idea who you were when we did that program together or why it was suggested that we do it together. I wish that I had. I think that the context of your work makes way more sense that we would have been doing that together and all of the great insight that you had for the people that were going through that program in the context of the work that you were doing. But that was a cool experience. Dr. Morse, as we were saying prior to recording, the work that you're doing in the sexual revolution and the work that you're doing with the Ruth Institute is so much broader than abortion in and of itself. And it's broad enough that it can hit on abortion and the impact of abortion on men, on women, on families, the impact of abortion on society, the impact of society on abortion. And so, with all of that, would you mind just kind of helping us to understand what the Ruth Institute is, what kind of work you're doing, and how you came to the realization that this is what your calling was?
Well, thanks for that question, Sean. When I started the Ruth Institute in 2008, it was in San Diego, California. And I thought that what the Ruth Institute was going to do was to talk with college-age women and law school-aged women about why they should not be afraid to start families, that they should go ahead, get married, start a family. Their brains would not turn to mush. They would be making a hugely important social contribution by taking good personal care of their children in a lifelong permanent marriage. That is a great calling. That's what I thought I was going to do. And I knew, because I'd been out of the labor force for a number of years because of raising my kids. You indicated there with my parent biography, people can get the vibe, that I was not an 80-hour a week at the office person while all that was going on. I left university teaching in 1996 and never looked back. So but I had been giving speeches out and about, and I had a number of contacts with college age students and with law students and so on. And so I knew there was a a desire for that message, that there were a lot of women who wanted to hear that, and a lot of guys who were like happy to hear somebody say that they as men were important, and that masculinity was not toxic. That was a term that wasn't used back then, but the idea was out and about, but then in 2008, I ended up being, I don't know how to exactly put it. Proposition 8 happened in my backyard in San Diego in 2008, right when I was starting the Ruth Institute. And people don't realize this, but it was Bishop Corleone, who was at that time the auxiliary bishop in San Diego. He got it on the ballot. He had a handful of rich Catholics who put up the money, got it on the ballot. And then once it was on the ballot, this whole interfaith coalition came together to make the case for man-woman marriage and why that was important to society. And I didn't feel I could sit on the sidelines while that went by, because, all the expertise I had developed was about how kids need their parents and kids need stable relationships between their parents. And I couldn't quite formulate it at the time, but over time I came to be able to formulate it, that if you redefine marriage, you will redefine parenthood, and parenthood will no longer be the natural mother and father. It will be all sorts of other things. And you could kind of see where the activists and the ideologues were going to take that ship, So that's how the Ruth Institute ended up, and all these topics that got us on the hate list. That's the short version of how we ended up being on the hate list, because we were saying, no, this is not good public policy. No matter, I don't really care about how you feel, or your lesbian coworker, or your next door neighbor, or your gay nephew, or whatever. There's something bigger here. There's something more substantial here than how people feel. And so that's how I ended up doing that kind of stuff. Let's put it that way. And in the process of doing that, Sean, I ended up kind of working my way back, you could say, from the issue at hand, which is, do we really need man-woman marriage? And if so, why? How can I explain that? How can I convey that to people? Do we really need that? And then working backwards to see all the wrong steps, all the missteps that society had already taken that had led us to the point to think that this could be a thing, and of course that included a discussion of divorce and no-fault divorce, which I think has been a catastrophic social policy. The open encouragement of unmarried parenthood, which I think has been a disaster for children, very, very difficult for children, and which has its own relationship then to abortion, right? As you know, we can talk about more, but I just came to see that all these issues were connected with one another. And I feel that it's my calling, because of the whole series of life experiences that I've had, and the cast of mind that I have, and the training that I have, and everything. They say that God doesn't waste anything. God will use your whole life experience, everything, and mold it into, whatever your unique calling is. He's going to use all of that stuff. I have come to feel that very strongly for myself, because in economics, we are trained to think systemically. So if the price of eggs changes over here, what happens to the demand for fertilizer and the demand for bacon and, all these other things? That's how we think, just trace things throughout the social system. And Sean, I'm here to tell you that on the debate over gay marriage, I was literally the only person who would talk like that. I would say, you guys, you're putting some new incentives in place. People are going to react to those incentives. Could we just take a minute to ask how they might be reacting, and what the consequences that all might be, So that's what I bring to the table. And that's why the work that we do at the Ruth Institute, I think, turns out to be helpful to anybody who's involved in any part of confronting and combating the sexual revolution, which y'all in the pro-life movement are, in a way, the longest standing movement to resist this kind of new way of looking at human sexuality and its place in our lives. And so we don't do counseling, we don't do lobbying, we don't do a lot of things that other people do, but I think that the insight that we bring to the table helps people be more effective at whatever they're doing. And so I get invited to a lot of different places that might surprise you. because people think, oh, she's really the only one who can help us figure this out, kind of thing. So I've had a lot of those type of experiences over the years.
And you think that stems from your background and expertise in economics and the economics type way of thinking?
In part, for sure. Yeah.
Did you think, was there ever a time, do you think, when, let's say, you were studying economics, you were getting your doctorate, or your first few years teaching, 10 years into teaching, where you had a thought that there was something that you were being called to do that was 100% different than teaching economics?
Nope. Never crossed my mind.
Isn't that funny?
Which is another way, it's a call from God, right? Because I didn't plan one iota of this whole thing. No, Sean, I was a lapsed Catholic for like 12 years. So I got married at the age of 20. I married the first guy who asked me, which was, that was a genius stroke. My 14-year-old sister could figure out it wasn't going to work, right? but I marched out of the church because, I had a Catholic wedding, but I was mad at the priest and I was mad at everybody. And, well, everybody who called it, they were right, that it was not a good thing for me to be doing at age 20. By the time I was 24, I had been, married, divorced. I had had an abortion, and was on my way to getting my Ph.D. and had all of that career, that career focus that a lot of people had. And I was big in the free market side of economics. And so I was always a conservative and always in resistance. I think you could say in resistance to communism and to socialism and kind of the economic side of what people think of as conservatism. I never wavered on that. But it took me a long time to figure out how incomplete that was. And so what happened to me, honestly, was infertility. When I got tenure, I said to my husband, my second husband, right, my new husband that I married in a libertarian ceremony that we wrote for ourselves. Okay, just so where, kind of where my thought process was. Okay, honey, it's time to start a family, and now I'm due to get tenure. Let's do it, and I had it all planned out exactly what month the baby was going to arrive and, all that kind of, because that's how, Sean, that's how all of my female colleagues, that's how they all thought, none of them had ever, I had female colleagues at Mason in the law school and the econ department and everything. None of them had ever missed a day of work, and it was like a sign of a badge of honor to do that. So that was my orientation at that time, if you can imagine. And then the infertility experience just drove me to my knees because I realized I couldn't plan everything, that I thought I was so smart and so great and everything. And well, there's one thing that I really, truly want the most of all, I can't have just by trying hard and following the rules and stuff like that. So that ended up bringing me back to the church in 1988. The campus minister at George Mason walked me through that whole process. Ended up getting the first marriage annulled, reconvalidating my vows in the Catholic Church, which my husband Rob, and he was not a believer, still is not a believer, but he held his nose and went through with the ceremony of to make me happy, and then we solved our infertility problem with a little boy from a Romanian orphanage. Who was 2.5 when we got him. And then 6 months later, I gave birth to a baby girl. And so in our home, we had, you could say a controlled experiment right there in our face that kids really, really need their parents. Because nobody had abused our boy as far as we could tell. He was very healthy physically, very robust, healthy guy. But he was very badly delayed and had a lot of he just had a lot of problems. And there were a lot of other kids who were coming from Romania around that time. This was 1991. We were kind of the first batch of people who got East European orphans. And they all had the same batch of problems. So you have to go, okay, this is systemic. This is not, we didn't just get unlucky with this kid. No, this is telling us something important about what children need and what children need from their own parents. And then later I put it together. Not only do they need this from me and my husband, and their own parents, they need things from society to say marriage is a stable institution for the benefit of children, and if we don't get this right, if we create all these wrong incentives, which is really, I was starting to see, letting people do whatever they feel like doing is not really a recipe for success, right? But that was the breakthrough, Sean. When I figured that out, okay, that laissez-faire doesn't work in the family. Laissez-faire may be okay in the economy, but it absolutely doesn't work in the family. That was a big breakthrough for me, where all the pieces started to fit together, including now, the Lord has used the fact that I had an infertility experience, because I can credibly say to people, hey, I never did IVF. I was never even tempted by IVF because I thought it was icky, and why did I think that? I don't know. Maybe that was a grace from my baptism or something, but I was never even tempted by IVF. But I can say from my heart, I do know how painful it is. I do know how devastating the infertility diagnosis can be. And so you can't pin that on me. So let's talk. Now let's talk about IVF, So yeah, then I'm now convinced that this is a divine call.
I think that's really profound. I also, when I was going to law school or when I was practicing law, would have answered the question, are you going to be active in the pro-life movement to the point where you're leading an organization and with a emphatic no? Well, I am. That is not what God's calling me to do. And in fact, it was about an 18-month period between when I first was asked to accept this position and when I actually accepted it, where I said no. That's not what God's calling me to do. And then God just told me I was wrong. And here I am. But also, like you said, the experiences that we've had throughout our life, that God uses all of those to shape us into the calling that he has for us. In my experience, having lost my first child to an abortion, the addiction, homelessness, going to law school, being a divorce lawyer, being a child custody lawyer, and then adopting children. I almost wait for it when I'm having a discussion about abortion with a pro-choice person who believes adamantly that pro-life people only care about the baby until it's born.
Right.
I'm waiting on the edge of my seat for the question, if you believe this, why don't you adopt? Because I'm ready, right? Like you said, you're ready for the IVF conversation. We've adopted 3.
How many kids are adopted of yours?
We have 3 adopted kids and 2 biological.
Okay.
And it so far has shut down the conversation because they think that's the gotcha moment, right? Like they're waiting to say, if you believe this, why don't you adopt? And before we had adopted 3, I actually took an opportunity one time to tell someone that if they convinced someone not to have an abortion, I would adopt that baby. And they went away. They just disappeared from the conversation. But because they don't want to hear that. They want to be right that pro-life people only care about the baby until it's born. They want to be right that nobody cares about mom after the baby is born. They need to believe that in order for their argument for abortion to make sense. And it doesn't make sense in the reality of things. And so it's true, I think that, and I think that's a really important thing for anyone who's listening, not only to this podcast, but anywhere in life, in whatever position they're in, to recognize is that whatever experiences we're going through right now, as uncomfortable as they may be, those experiences are shaping who we are meant to be. And it's all right on the other side. And so, does anybody want to become a homeless meth addict? No. And I would not suggest it. I don't think that's the right path. However,
you made the best of it, but
yeah.
No.
But I mean, if someone's currently dealing with something similar to that, I believe that person has so much to offer once they find their way through it, and I believe the only way to find your way through that is with God. You said something that I don't know that I was expecting. You were talking about how when you first started finding this calling, that you found that there were a lot of women, young professionals who were happy to hear the message that you were providing. But you also said a lot of men who were happy to hear that they were important.
Yes.
I was listening to a podcast with Chris Williamson, and his guest was Richard Reeves, and I don't remember the name of his institute, but it's an institute basically on the study of men and boys. Is what Richard Reeves has founded, and they were discussing, the suicide, that men suicide is exponentially greater than women's suicide. And that's actually what they got into in this conversation was, as society has changed, as women have come from being homemakers, exclusively family oriented, to now you are needed in the workforce. Now you are needed as a doctor. Now you are needed as a, in whatever field. We need women to participate here and here and here and here. And there's never been a lack of, are women needed? Men, it's been more whittled down to where you are needed as the provider. But now that women are providing, where is your need?
Who needs you?
So then that is where they were, at least in that part of that conversation, coming to the conclusion of, why is it that men feel lost to the point where they make these extreme decisions to end their lives, and that part of that, at least, is the lack of feeling important, the lack of feeling needed.
Yes.
And so I thought it was really important to share that with you, because you said those exact words, in what you do with the sexual revolution. I think that you probably have a lot of great insight onto that.
Well, what I was saying back 15 years ago or whatever it was, when I was having these conversations with law students, I for a while I was an approved speaker by the Federalist Society. And for a while I was a speaker at the Alliance Defending Freedom's Blackstone Legal Fellowship. So I had a lot of contact with law students during that period of time, around the time that I was starting the Ruth Institute and stuff. And I remember one of the things that I would say in the course of these conversations was that I would talk about men, that it's not just that men are going to jobs and they feel powerful because they're making money. No, it's the love of their families that keeps them going out there on the train platform day after day, in the snow, in the rain, waiting for the train to come to take them to a job they might not like very much. They're doing it for the love of their families. That's why they're doing it. That's what gives it meaning, And so even if it's not all glamour, that's what I was trying to get across. But also, Sean, I can remember looking at the audience and seeing the boys sit up straighter. Just that small amount of affirmation that I was giving them, that you're not doing it. They're not doing it for bad reasons. They're doing it for good reasons. And we need them. We need them to be motivated by the love of others. We want men to put their power and their ability and their aggression, let's be honest, their aggression at the service of the family, to protect the weak. That's what a good man does, And I just see those boys just kind of, sit up straighter and everything. They're like, I'm on the right track. That look on their faces, is like, they deserve that. They deserve to hear that. It's nothing more than the honest to goodness truth. I think women want to be loved and men want to be needed. I think, we both need both, but I think the predominant is that men need to be needed and women need to be loved.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, of course, saying that men and women are different, that's completely toxic. You're not allowed to say that. You're not even allowed to have that thought cross your mind, that kind of thing. But
right. Which is crazy.
It's completely crazy. Let us say for the record,
yes,
that's crazy. Yeah.
And I think that probably is what's led to a lot of the ideology of abortion. is if men and women aren't different, then women should not have to bear what they perceive as the burden of pregnancy. And therefore, it's not fair. And I don't know if I'm on the right track there, but it just seems like when you talk about the sexual revolution, and the destructive nature of the sexual revolution, then that's kind of the direction that a lot of it is taken.
Well, one of the opening moves, of course, is feminism, this thing we call feminism, which I don't like that term because it suggests that these women speak for all women, which is obviously incorrect. They've never spoken for me, let the record say. I've never spoken for me. And the literally millions of women who are involved in the pregnancy care center movement, that's a real women's movement right there. You go to the New Life Counseling Banquet or the ABC Pregnancy Center Banquet, it's all women, it's women, the heart of women reaching out to help other women. That's what that's all about. And of course, the pro-abortion people run it down and badmouth it and try to shut it down and, all the rest of it. But, wait, where was I going? Oh, the opening move was equality for women, equality, money, and it was all being measured in terms of money. Well, okay, here's your economics coming into play. This was known in the 1960s, Sean. This is already in the literature. When women act like men, they get the same pay as men. When women leave the labor force to take care of kids, they don't get the same pay as men. Boom. Simple. Very simple, right? And you would think, why is this a crisis? Why are we upset? What's the problem here? But no, if you have in your mind, we got to have equality, then the thing you have to do is you have to neutralize the impact of babies. And that's what the feminists set out to do. And in my mind, that's how feminism was so accepted by corporate America, because corporate America kind of liked the idea of a whole new set of labor force participants who are eager to prove themselves, right? And for whom you could kind of take advantage of them more because they're so eager to prove themselves and they need a job, right? If you don't have a reliable husband, if you're not sure your husband's going to stay with you, or if you're a single parent, you need your job, right? So corporate America buckled to feminism very quickly, and that I didn't see the significance of that back in the day when I was just a free market economist. I was looking at, these people want to regulate every corner of the labor market to get equality because that's what it will take to really make women equal. You have to regulate how people think about what they want and what topics they major in and, all this kind of stuff. You're going to have to regulate it. And of course they have been extraordinarily intrusive and all of that. But corporate America it didn't bother them, but it took me a while to see why that was important, why they weren't resisting it more, because they were getting something out of it that they wanted to. So that's where we as pro-life people who are, I would say, in the main, pro-life people across the board are more committed to traditional Christian sexual ethics. It's not universally true. You'll find some atheists for life and stuff like that. But across the board, in general, I think it's safe to say that people are, the people on the pro-life side of things are more committed and more sympathetic with the traditional Christian views and values around marriage and family and so on. And what's happened to us gradually, one little nitpick at a time, there's a whole sexual constitution that has been rewritten, right? So the norms, what's considered normal, what's considered normative, is completely different today than it was when I was a little girl, because there were a set of rules back in the day, and now there are a new set of rules, and they're very different, and they affect everybody. And that's why when somebody says, well, if you don't agree with abortion, you don't have to get one. Well, that's true, but you are changing the set of rules under which everyone makes decisions and where everybody is has to operate. The fact that I'm a pro-life Catholic, I can't opt out of the no-fault divorce system. I'm still operating within that framework. I can't withhold my taxes from the welfare misincentives that drive people to not get married, or that fund taxpayer funding for contraception for unmarried minors. I can't opt out of that. So you can't, and that's all part of the system that has brought us where we are today. And I can't opt out of it. You're control. You don't just want to let individuals do their thing. You have a whole structural system that you're wrapping around that.
Well, and then wouldn't the idea that if you don't want an abortion, if you don't believe in abortion, don't have one, wouldn't that presuppose that I don't believe in abortion because I want children, as opposed to I don't believe in abortion because I believe that it's murder and I believe that the killing of an innocent life is wrong? That'd be similar to saying, well, if you don't believe that stealing is wrong, just don't steal. But we don't need to legislate whether or not stealing is legal or illegal. If you don't believe in murder, just don't kill anybody. But we don't need to legislate. It's that same thought process, and it misses the point that I don't just believe that I don't want to steal. I believe that stealing is bad for society in general, and without rules and regulations in place to stop it, it could create chaos. I don't just believe that I don't want to have an abortion. I believe that abortion is the killing of an innocent baby and that we should not be killing babies, and that killing babies could lead to societal chaos. And it has.
And yeah. It is, yeah. Right. Right.
It has, because, just at what point in your past would you ever have looked forward to 2024 and said, you know what, I think that the only issue that's going to be important to voters or to the presidential candidates in 2024 is abortion? Like at what time in history could we have guessed that this would be the number one issue being put out by one of the parties?
Right.
It's all about abortion. And if you don't agree with abortion, then you hate women.
Right. And the further thing is, Sean, that back in the day, there were people who predicted that not only abortion was going to have catastrophic social effects, but also contraception. And this needs to be said. And I don't know if Men for Life want to talk about contraception, but the Ruth Institute definitely talks about contraception. Because what that did was to change the sexual constitution, which says that you can safely assume that sex is a sterile activity. We've created a society where sex is normally and normatively a sterile activity. And you can have a baby if you happen to have quirky lifestyle preferences, that's fine. But everybody's entitled to act like sex does make babies, right? And that's why we have abortion as a backup. And that's why we have a lot of non-marital sex. And the non-marital sex does not, contrary to popular opinion, non-marital sex does not enhance your future married life. It does not, And that's another thing I always wanted to be talking about. When I first started the Ruth Institute, guys, don't move in with your boyfriend. Not a good idea. It's not going to help. But all of that is part of the new sexual constitution, the revolutionary constitution, which says that you're entitled to act as if you can have all the sex you want and absolutely nothing bad is ever going to happen. And if something bad happens, the state, we will take care of that for you. We'll clean it up for you so that you can have all the sex you want without anything bad happening, including anyone whose voices disapproval of you. We're going to penalize them because we don't want you to feel bad. That's how far it's gone. And I think, in 1973, not that many people would have predicted all of this, but some of them did, and they were poo-pooed. They were systematically poo-pooed. But I think it's pretty clear that they were not wrong.
Yeah. How do you think that abortion? Because I think it's I don't know that it's cyclical, but it's symbiotic in the nature that how abortion becoming commonplace and being used, just as you just said, as a backup to contraception, has impacted the way that men view abortion or raising a family or relationships with women. And at the same time, men foregoing their responsibilities as providers, as protectors, has influenced the abortion argument. So which one do you think came first?
Well, it's kind of a spiral, isn't it? That the contraceptive ideology. This is the way we talk about it at the Ruth Institute. We describe it as the contraceptive ideology, which includes abortion. But the ideology basically says that a good society should separate sex and babies. That's the mark of a good society, separating sex from babies. And by the way, a lot of that was financed by people who think there are too many people in the world, right? The whole population control people um, pasted feminism over the top of their views and got much more acceptance for them when they were just saying there are too many people in the world. People thought that was creepy when they talked like that. But when they start talking about women's empowerment, oh, now we're all on board, But anyway, the whole cycle that contraceptive ideology sets in motion is that we will not treat the sexual act as a procreative act, which should be an act of love, a love for your partner and a love for the child that you might produce together. We don't have any obligation to view it in that manner. Now we view it as a recreational activity, which means we've taken the most social thing we do, which is written into our bodies, right, male and female bodies. It's meant to create a bond between the husband and the wife because we attach to our sex partners, male and female, both have a tendency to attach to their sex partners. And we have a tendency to have babies as a result of this act. So it's a intrinsically social act. We've reduced it to a recreational good. And that changes the way we view our sex partners, and it changes the way we view our children. And the more we do it, the more that gets reinforced, right? That your women are expected to treat it in a more casual manner, and yet it's not satisfying. And so then you have some kind of addictive process to make you feel better about it. And the same with men, that it's not satisfying in the same way that it would be if they called forth all of these other virtues out of the man to protect his wife and to protect his children and to provide for them and to be there for him and to take the satisfaction in seeing the children develop and mature and become good people in and of themselves. All of that it's procreative rather than simple reproduction. Reproduction is what rabbits do. Procreation is what humans do with the help of God, right? You're participating in the divine. And so that's what we've lost, and we've kind of spiraled downward. And I think pro-lifers need to be realistic about that's what we're facing, is kind of that we want to interrupt that downward spiral to give people the hope of real love, of authentic love being possible. And so for the children whose parents have never been together or whose parents have divorced, separated from one another, for children who cannot look to their parents for reliable love for them and for each other, those children are starting at a huge disadvantage in life, and that's what you and I see as adoptive parents, that the children, what should have been their birthright, they don't have. And so we're, as adoptive parents, trying to do our best to deal with the fact that a loss has occurred. These children have experienced a loss before they ever end up in our home, and so now we've got that on a massive scale, Sean. That's not a quirk anymore. Now it's very widespread. And I guess my message to the world is that you can try to mitigate the bad effects of the sexual revolution, but you can't. I think it's a fool's errand to think that you can just mitigate without chopping the whole tree down. If you think you're going to somehow solve sexual abuse, like the Me Too movement thought they were somehow going to put a stop to women being harassed and abused and stuff, without ever talking about pornography and the pill and being sex positive. We're all supposed to be sex positive. We're never going to challenge that, but somehow we want the abuse to go away. Wait a minute. I don't think that can happen, and so I would invite people to be more willing to think about it more systemically in whatever branch of this whole set of problems you might find yourself working in. That would be my suggestion to people, and that's what we try to do at the Ruth Institute: show how the pieces are, fit together.
How do you cut the tree down?
I don't know. Sean, we lost this thing piecemeal. I don't know that we can get it back piecemeal. I'm not sure how we're going to get it back. I'm really not. I'm not a revolutionary at heart, but
To just keep moving forward
just keep moving
and trust
forward.
that
Just do the next.
God can provide the opportunity.
I think so. I think that's right. I don't really know.
That's fair. Like,
yeah.
How do you solve the ultimate problem of everything? Is a really big question to be asked at 9:00 on a Monday morning. So for you to not be prepared with a definitive answer is acceptable.
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. But I do think it would be a lot of your pro-life guys would benefit from reading my book, The Sexual State. Because I think you can tell from my conversation here, I have an analytic cast of mind, and a lot of men have an analytic cast of mind. And so I think they would be able to relate to a lot of what I have to say there. But I am trying to go through the whole thing systematically, and to say one thing led to another, and here's how it worked, and also the other thing that I think is worth saying is that the sexual revolution is irrational. It's irrational to believe that you can build a society around the idea that sex doesn't make babies or that men and women aren't different. That's crazy. It's not going to happen. And so what that means, a lot of times people draw the wrong conclusion from that. They say, oh, see, it's crazy. It's going to collapse. That's not necessarily the case, because the appeal of the ideology is that it requires a lot of power to do the impossible. And so the people who are power hungry, they're perfectly okay demanding that people do the impossible. They kind of enjoy monitoring people's pronouns. The kind of person I'm talking about? I mean, I think a lot of people know this type of person, right? And so to do the impossible requires a lot of power, and it requires a lot of propaganda. And that one point, when you see that what you're surrounded with is propaganda calculated to prop up something that is untrue, I think that empowers people, to be honest. When I talk to people about it, they go, wow, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I go, yeah, it is everywhere. And what you do with it is you dismiss it. You don't try to argue against every single little point. You dismiss it as propaganda and move on to say something that's true, try to counter with whatever is true. But they can make stuff up faster than you can refute it. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, and that's a general proposition. Anybody can make stuff up faster than you can, faster than people can refute it. So,
and it's happened a lot just in this election cycle, with all of the news stories suggesting that that this person was killed because of an abortion ban, or died because of an abortion ban, or the woman who was put on a platform at the DNC, and then afterwards who talked about how her third pregnancy, without an abortion, she would not be able to have a healthy pregnancy today. They leave out all of the facts. They leave out the fact that the reason that she's suggesting that third pregnancy was dangerous is because it had to be a C-section, because she'd already had 2 C-sections. Well, this pregnancy she has now that she's celebrating has to be a C-section because the first 2 pregnancies were C-sections. So this pregnancy that she's celebrating is no less dangerous than the pregnancy that she aborted because it was dangerous. What they also left out was that she found later in the pregnancy that there was a characteristic that she did not like, and that is why she had the abortion. It was an elective abortion. It was not because of danger to the pregnancy or danger to herself. They leave all that out. They go with the narrative that because it's a C-section, it was dangerous, so she needed to be able to have it. So thank God abortion was legal so that she could have the abortion, so that she wasn't in danger of having a third C-section.
Which she's about
even though now she's celebrating having a third C-section. But nobody wants to hear that, and stories like that have just been coming and coming and coming and coming. And this person died because of this, and this person died because of this. One of them was recently put out happened in 2018 before the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And it had nothing to do with abortion bans. But they're still putting it out as abortion bans killed this woman. And it takes a village, to use that term, to find all of the information in the background, because like you said, they can make stuff up faster than you can dispute it. And I don't want to spend 100% of my time doing the actual research against everything that that they're saying. Thankfully, there are organizations who have the manpower to do that at a very fast click, and to put out the real information. But the people on the pro-choice side have created these echo chambers where they're never going to see that unless they actually engage in civil discourse.
Right. And one thing that I think your followers should be aware of is the way that we're losing science. We are losing the ability to do honest to goodness science because of abortion and other parts of the sexual revolution. But the abortion people pioneered a lot of this stuff. Okay, so for instance, on our channel, I interviewed a guy who had been studying the link between abortion and breast cancer. And he was present in 2001, I think, when the National Institutes of Health came to the consensus that there is no relation between abortion and breast cancer. And I wanted to interview him because I wanted him to explain to people how this was done. The way it was done was by never inviting anybody who had a different interpretation of the scientific evidence, right? So you only invite the people who have publicly committed to agreeing with the predetermined consensus, and nobody else is allowed to come. Nobody's allowed to ask a question from the floor. Nobody's allowed to present a minority report. I mean, it's just, that's the consensus. Okay, so then this is in 2001, and that technique has been repeated in one sort of case after another. Okay, so the professional societies censor stuff. I think it's going, I don't follow this area as closely, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going on in the whole climate change debate, the so-called debate. Consensus is manufactured. People saw that with the COVID issues surrounding COVID and its mitigation and vaccines and everything. The consensus was achieved by not listening to certain people, right? And so that means we're losing science, okay? My position is you should put it out there, let people argue back and forth, let people make up their own mind. That's science. That's a free society of mature adults, but that's not where we are. And so that interview that I did, we had it on our channel, Sean, and a few months maybe after the Dobbs decision came down, YouTube banned it. YouTube took it down because it was medical misinformation. Okay, so now you can only find that on our locals channel, which is a free speech alternative to YouTube, which I hope you are backing up everything that you do in this podcast someplace other than YouTube. In addition to YouTube, I hope you've got all those other platforms going. But the point is,
what is the name of the platform?
Well, we use Locals as one.
Locals, okay.
And that's the one that I feel like Jordan Peterson and those guys use that all the time. And I forget who invented it, but anyway. And then there's Rumble and BitChute. There's a number of them out there, and you can upload pretty readily to all of them, just so your stuff stays up there. But I mean, I just want people to understand that it's the people of faith who are saying, let's put out the data and let people decide. It's this so-called atheist left, I don't know what to call them exactly, but the people who are promoting the sexual revolution, who are saying that religion is bad and religion is against science and follow the science and all this stuff, they are the ones who are actively suppressing the scientific method. They don't want to hear. If you've got something to say that we don't want to hear, we're going to suppress it. And now, Sean, they've taken the next step. They are trying to get stuff retracted out of journals. Priscilla Coleman, let me give you one example.
1984. George Orwell, 1984. Like, that's what's happening right now.
Yes. The memory hole, okay? So Priscilla Coleman, this is a person you should know, okay? Because she's done, over the years, a lot of research on the impact of abortion on women's mental health. And it's been in the literature for quite a while that probably between 10 and 30% of women are seriously negatively impacted by their abortions, and it doesn't go away, okay? Well, so she's got an article. It's been in the literature since, I think, 2011, It's been cited in a bunch of court cases now, right? And so now people are going to the journal and saying, you need to retract that article because blah, 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 and they make up stuff about why it should be retracted. In this case, thankfully, the journal editors said, there's no way we're taking this down. It has survived professional criticism by being out there since 2011. People can make up their own minds. No, we're not taking it down. But this is the new trend. Our friends at Charlotte Lozier Institute, they have been recently attacked in this way. And there's no other thing to call it. It's an attack. When somebody says, we aren't even going to let anybody know that you did this research. We're taking it down. We don't want anybody to see it. We're going to put it in the memory hole. That is a loss of science. That's a loss to everybody. And it's the people of faith, doggone it, it's the religious people who are fighting that. It's not the atheists. It's not the rationalists, the people who call themselves rational humanists or whatever they're calling themselves these days. They're not the ones throwing themselves in front of the moving train. We are.
And it's got to be, an extreme fear on their part to go after things that have already existed, to say, hey, we're going to go back in time and we're going to make sure that this never happened. Because if it happened and people can find it, then they're going to know that we're wrong. So the only way for people to believe that we're right is if we change history and we disallow alternating views from the present, and that is the only way they can do it, because back, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was, like you said, a matter of just not allowing people to participate in the research. Today, if you look at COVID or other current examples, it's just outright like blasting people. If someone comes out with an opposing view, they are made, by the groupthink to appear as though they are crazy, they are conspiracy theorists, they are wrong, they are discredited. Like, it's an active working rather than working to prove your own side in the face of resistance. It's it's the Spanish Inquisition. It's shutting down complete sides of the argument and scaring people from presenting
correct
the alternating the alternating
correct
alternate views.
And my man that I interviewed, he said exactly, listen to this. And I got him on tape saying, see, Sean, part of what we're trying to do at the Ruth Institute is create a record. Create a stinking record of people saying on camera, this is what happened to me. So this guy, Dr. Joel Brind, he had a colleague. He said, look, could we collaborate? I know you kind of agree with me. Could we write a minority report? And she says to him, look, I have to live with these people. They sign off on my grants. End of story. That was the end of story. Okay, so they're using the federal government grant money to steer everybody down the path that they want, and that's not what you do when you're sure of yourself. That's not how science is supposed to proceed. That should be a big red flag that there's something here that needs to be looked at, rather than to just continue tamping it down. So I think your followers really need to be aware of this. I don't know what all projects Men for Life is going to have, but I imagine that the people who are watching your podcast are going to be interested in the fact that this is going on across the board. And I think it was perfected with the abortion issue. I mean, it certainly predates a lot of the other issues that we're talking about that we see so prominently today.
Well, Dr. I know you told me not to call you Dr. Morse, but I've kept doing it throughout the podcast.
That's okay.
So Jennifer, I know we're running out of time here. I just have one question that I would like to ask, because this is a conversation that I've had with the last several guests that I've had, all of whom were men. You are the first female guest that we've had on this podcast. And the question, it revolves around the argument of, no uterus, no voice. And, the idea that as a man, I should have no voice in the abortion argument because I don't have a uterus, and therefore I cannot imagine what it's like to be pregnant. And so I'm curious, as a woman, what advice would you give to a man faced with that argument?
Well, first of all, it's interesting now that a person doesn't have to have a uterus in order to claim to be a woman and get themselves placed into a women's prison or on a women's sports team. So biological essentialism has gone away somehow. I mean, it's very confusing, don't you think, that the same group of people is saying both of those things? But I think that the object of that argument always was to get the men off the playing field. Okay. And marginalizing men from the whole conversation about marriage, family, and human sexuality, getting men off the battlefield was a crucial step for the sexual revolutionaries to basically plow through the women and children and do whatever they wanted. And that has happened in spades. And so I would say, fellas, do not be, what's the word I'm looking for? Don't let them bully you into going off the field. You have as much right in the conversation about procreation, love, marriage, family. You have every bit as much right to have something to say about that as women do. Because having a baby is not the only piece of the equation. See, this is what they do. They take the human experience, which is an integrated human experience of two full persons coming together to procreate with the help of God into a new person. And we have the idea, you and I have the idea, that that new person has some rights and entitlement, that being born as the result of the loving embrace of your mother and father, that's the birthright of every human being. We're the real egalitarians, you see. We really think everybody is equally entitled to the love of their mother and their father, and to have their mother and father love each other. And back in the day, that used to be true. Even poor children got to have their daddy back in the day, you know? So what the revolutionaries do is they chop up the experience, and they even chop up the person, you know, so that we're all just a collection of parts or a collection of events, and nothing's integrated, nothing's held together as a comprehensive whole. And that's one of the things I think that's making us stupid, frankly, you know, because we're just looking at little corners of things and we never put ourselves back together, and we never put the family back together, and we never see that man for woman and woman for man, that is a great and beautiful and noble thing, to give of yourself to the other person, and then to be able to receive the other person. That's all of tremendous value, and men have a stake in that conversation as much as women do. And you know that because you've encountered men who regret the loss of fatherhood for a decision that they didn't want, and had no control over, you know. So it's a really terrible argument with terrible consequences. And I would encourage all of your followers to be just as intentional as you possibly can in resisting that argument, because it's incorrect.
And it goes back to something that you brought up in the beginning of the podcast, which is that men were happy to hear that they were important. And you said men need to be needed. They have a need to be needed. And I think that it's important for men to realize that need to be needed, while as a provider, is incredibly important. It also, as a protector, is incredibly important. As a husband, as a father, as someone who is not scared to stand up for what is right, even when the world is turning crazy. And so, you know, I think, like you just said, I think it's really important for men to step into this fight and step into their role as men again, and to denounce the crazy that is the abortion movement. And so you have such a unique way of looking at this, and a unique perspective from mine in from where you've come from to get to the point that you're at today. And I think that, you know, given a time when neither one of us had anything else to do, we could probably go on for another hour or so. But I also want to respect your time, because I've already exceeded what I asked you for, and I really do appreciate everything that you've done for us, and for you coming on today. I want to make sure that our listeners and our viewers can find you and support you. I know the Ruth Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. So how can we support you, and where can we find you to support what you're doing?
So come on over to ruthinstitute.org. And you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, and that will keep you appraised of what we're saying, thinking, doing, writing. And then also come check out our YouTube channel. We have a very active YouTube channel. We publish multiple videos per week. And we now have over 57,000 subscribers. We're on our way to getting 60,000 subscribers. So we would certainly welcome all of your followers over there, Sean. The Men for Life are definitely our kind of guys. So we would love to see you at the ruthinstitute.org.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, thank you so much. And your YouTube show is the Dr. Day
That's correct.
Show.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you so much again for coming on. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.